happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I was here about 2 years ago as an attendee and a mentor, so I'm very honored that Bala asked me to speak this year at the conference. So quickly, my name is Bijal Nagrashna. I'm the Startup Business Development Manager for the Nordics and Baltics. Before we get into the talk, my entire team is here this week, so we'd like to kind of make a splash in Iceland. So tomorrow we're going to do a serverless workshop, which is all day. We also are participating opportunities with FinTech. And on Wednesday, we're doing a half-a-day workshop on some of our AI ML tools that we have. In addition to that, we're flying over a technical evangelist on Wednesday for the AWS user group. If you have any questions about these events or AWS, my team is here as well if you want to raise your hands. And they'll be happy to help you out. So a little bit about just what my team does and what we do, so you have context on why I'm speaking here on this topic. So we work with startups anywhere from a 2-person team to big companies such as a Klarna, iZettle, or Lyft, or what have you. And we work through VCs, incubators, and accelerators. And we basically help startups grow and scale, both on the technology side and on the business side, for the first 2 years or so. My team is a global team. We're all ex-VCs and ex-founders with industry experience. Mine specifically is in investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, and as you mentioned before, I joined a startup that was acquired, co-founded one, and started my own company as well. So our team is really personally invested in helping you grow, both on the technology and on the business side as well, because we've been there. We know the ups and the downs. My team has had very successful exits and very, very successful failures as well. So just quickly, a show of hands. How many of you are in a team of about 5 or less? About 20 or more. Sorry, 20 or less. 50? Okay, 200 or less? Over 1,000? Okay, great. And how many of you have heard of the Dunbar number or the rule of 150? Oh, a couple of you. So the Dunbar number is a theory where an individual can have meaningful relationships with about 150 people. And beyond that, you need to create rules and mechanisms. So what is it that you need to do when you start scaling your companies 10, 15, 200, or 1,000? How do you place these rules and mechanisms in order for you to keep achieving innovation? So I'm here to talk to you about how to keep your startup DNA, that drive that you had at the very beginning, as you're scaling out your company. So many of you have heard of Steve Blank, the father of Lean Startup. He talks about the customer development process. And he says a lot of us spend our time in the beginning phase, which is the search phase, and where we do customer discovery and customer validation. And sometimes we'll iterate, and maybe we'll pivot or whatnot. That's where you'll be creating your MVP. And a lot less focus is spent on the actual execution phase of the company, specifically the company building part of it. And company building is quite important, and it gets very little attention. So when he talks about company building, about the Shakespearean tragedy, meaning after blood, sweat, and tears, when you're creating your company, things may completely fall apart. Your investors may push you out, your co-founders may not be agreeing on the strategy, your engineering team may not be working cohesively. There could be many things. What made the company very successful at the beginning may not necessarily help you get you to that next stage. But we've seen great examples in our community of startups that have done that. For example, Brian Chesky at Airbnb grew a very small team at Airbnb and scaling that out. We've had Box that went IPO as well. And a lot of other companies, such as Amazon, going from a very small team to now 600,000 employees globally. How is it that these founders were able to take and transition their company into the next stage and were able to keep the company going at constant and rapid innovation? So I'll talk about case studies and give you some examples of how other companies have done this. So Airbnb, one of our AWS customers, is very vocal and very open about how they treat culture in the company and how they've created culture and value in their company as well. So when Airbnb closed their Series C funding with Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, invited Peter to the Berlin office. And they talked about metrics, went really deep into the data and the strategy. Brian asked Peter, what is the most important piece of advice that you can give us To which Peter said, "Mess up the culture." Peter told Brian that one of the reasons he put in $150 million is because of Airbnb's culture. And he has said, and he has seen time and time again, when companies reach a certain size, they mess things up because they don't think about company building. So that got Brian thinking about the culture, and he penned a very famous blog post on Medium entitled "Don't F Up the Culture," which I encourage you to read. In it, he says, "The culture is what creates the foundation for all future innovation. If you break the culture, you break the machine that creates your products." Now, how is Airbnb structured? They have really tight teams, tight groups of about 10 people or less. They have cross-functional responsibilities, so they work with engineers, with data scientists, product owners, designers, and etc. And each of the teams know a non-overlapping piece of the project. So the host team and the guest team are kept separate because they have separate needs. But because of the symbiotic relationships, they also contribute to each other's goals, product roadmap, and partner up on projects as well. So they essentially call it structured teams with fluid responsibilities. So what is your DNA? And how do you build and keep your culture, hire and scale your companies? A lot of companies start off very agile. They can move very quickly and deliver innovation at a very fast rate. And then you grow, and you get bogged down into the details and are a bit slow. When is the role of culture important? Well, it's important the second that you start your company. At Amazon, we have a saying that every day is day one. You get started when you're in the startup phase. The first few hires are the most important hires that you will make. They're going to create the environment and make decisions for all future hires and even the product roadmap. If you hire a few mediocre, unmotivated employees, that could spell doom for your company before you even write a single line of code. Airbnb decided to create their values at the very beginning of the company before they even made a single hire. In fact, Brian Chesky said it on the first 300 hires because he wanted to make sure that he instilled the DNA of the company into each one of these employees, because he knew that they would decide who was going to be hired next and what the product roadmap was going to be like when these future employees would come on board. So part of my role is I do leadership as well, and I'll be doing that tomorrow. And some of the things that we talk about is getting ready for the VCs, the employee pitch deck. How do you present your company? We also talk about how can we illustrate the value proposition of your product or service. I have noticed very little time is being spent on employer branding. How do you show someone why they should work for you? What is your startup DNA? And Jeff Bezos has something to say about that.
When you attract people who have the DNA of pioneers and the DNA of explorers, you build a company of like-minded people who want to invent. And that's what they think about when they get up in the morning. How are we going to work backwards from customers and build a great service or a great product?
So to attract the right people, how do you clearly articulate your values? Glassdoor actually did a study that employers that spend time on employer branding actually were 3 times as likely to hire the right people. So what happens when you're actually scaling the company, when you're off that early beginning stage? How do you create an environment to make people be very successful? So Mike Curtis has this to say: good culture creates an environment where people can do their best work. So you should not only get your team on board, but also think about extending your culture to your investors as well. It's almost like a marriage. But you can also extend your culture to your customers, put it beyond your walls. So for example, Airbnb actually does this with the whole superhost designation for some of their customers. So what should you think about? As an early stage, find your identity, who you are, and then when you start scaling, think about the structure that you want to put in line and create mechanisms for your organization. Evernote has this to say: product is the product, the culture is the next 100 products. One of our other customers, Supercell, maker of Clash of Clans, this is data from 2017. There were about 200 people, 4 games, and $2 billion in revenue. How were they able to do this? So they classify the structure as a bottom-up structure, where the management team acts as resources and services to the games team. And the games team have a lot of autonomy on taking the course of the direction of how the game is developed. And in fact, when they have failures, they actually celebrate it in a big way. They have champagne parties. They also name their conference rooms after failed games as well. And they take all these learnings into the development of their games. One of our other startups in Malmo, you may have heard of them, called Mapillary. They do street-level imagery platform. I met them a few years ago, and we started mentoring them, doing some technical reviews with them as well. And a couple of months ago, I hosted a CTO lunch in Malmo. Invited one of our solution architects, because sometimes when CTOs talk, I don't know what's going on. So it's always nice to have. And we went around talking about pain points. And every single CTO talked about a pain point that wasn't technical. It was about how do we get the teams to work together? How do we take the company to the next phase? And I was sitting next to Peter, the CTO of Mapillary, and he said that when we were a team of 10, we decided how we were going to work. And I didn't know why the CEO was making us do this, but now that we're 53, I'm so happy that we did this because we have 0 hiring issues. So this is what their office looks like. They're 53 people in 14 different countries, 8 different time zones. All interact via video. And they use a lot of tools to kind of keep things going, for example, Slack. Of course, this isn't for everyone. And they're quite vocally critical about this as well. And they're quite honest about how they work. They do lots of typing, documenting. They need to figure out when to work and when not to work and be disciplined about that. And it is not easy to do this. It does feel lonely sometimes. And you can't do it halfway. But here's what brings them together. It's not only in their culture, but also it translates into their product as well. Transparency, collaboration, trust, and believing in technology. At a practical level, this is on a day-to-day basis. They communicate a lot. And they're very, very open. They have clear definitions on what the goals need to be, and they trust each other, and they give each other autonomy. They hire the right people. In fact, the VP of Data Analytics said that she looks for a smile to know that you're intrigued by the product, and this excites you, the work environment excites you as well. They have flexible office hours, and they have lots of fun. And because of this, they have a 96% retention rate. Only 2 people have since they started. And as I mentioned, they have 0 hiring issues. They have developers in Cordoba, Argentina, some in Asia, some in Europe, but they all can work together. So what happens when you grow? At scale, it's a very different story. Amazon, even after 24 years, we still consider ourselves a technology company. And what's our startup DNA, and how is it that we bring everyone together? So if I'm in the Tokyo office, Cape Town, Tel Aviv, Stockholm, or in the US, we have these leadership principles, or LPs, that kind of bring us together, and they're all on our walls in every single one of the offices the minute I walk in. They're an authentic representation of who we are. It gives us a practical guideline when we need to make any trade-offs. So for example, when we're building strategy, when we need to prioritize, when we need to hire. In fact, every single person in our company has to take a training to hire people. And the majority of the things that we're hired on are the leadership principles. About 90% of the questions that we ask during the interview process are about the leadership principles. We want to make sure that you can operate the same way as anybody else in another company, in another city. In fact, if I were to miss some of my goals, but I exemplified most of these leadership principles, I would still be considered a valued employee at the company. So I first thought when I moved, started working at Amazon, that we would, talk about this like the first few weeks, and I would forget about it. But then I noticed that I was actively encouraged to disagree and commit with senior leaders. I was encouraged to invent and simplify as well. And this drives the behavior of our company, and it gives us a lot of autonomy to do the work that we want to do. I'll dive deep into a couple of principles to kind of give you some examples. So the first one is called ownership. Leaders are owners. They think long-term, don't sacrifice long-term value for short-term results. They act on the behalf of the entire company beyond just their own team. They never say, that's not my job. And at Amazon, everyone's a leader in their domain. So it's not just for the senior leaders, these leadership principles. So we never say, that's not my job. And that's the way we operate and develop as well. So we're set up more in a DevOps structure. We have small teams. We're doing this about 2003 or so. And it drives a lot of ownership. So we have small teams that own things from beginning to end. So right now, if launch Amazon.com, you'd be invoking 250 different features and services, all of which have their own little two pizza teams in a way. We call this two pizza teams, two American-sized pizzas. Our mindset is if we need more than two pizzas to feed a team, then the team is too big. It's going to get bogged down into the details. So we restructure ourselves to create the teams a bit smaller so we can be agile and move quickly as well. A little bit similar to what Airbnb is doing with 10 people or less. And the team is cross-functional, designers, developers, testers, and et cetera. The next one is dive deep. Operate at all levels, they stay connected to the details, audit frequently, no task is beneath them. So we not only have to take a 50,000-meter view of the situation, we also have to roll up our sleeves and look at the details. And the way we do this is that we're a very data-driven metrics company. The two pizza teams that I mentioned, each of them have a scorecard. So on a weekly basis, we look at data. And the data that's on there, the metrics, are data that are customer impacting. So if we look at the data and something is going well, maybe we'll scale it up to another market segment. If it's not going well, maybe we can prevent something, or maybe it's already impacted the customer. What should we do? So here's an example. On Instant Video, one of the products that we have, there was a glitch in the system, so when you start watching the video, it would stop, and then the movie would play back again from the beginning. That's a little annoying. So what had happened is someone on the two pizza team saw in the data what was happening. They dove deep into the data and were able to act quickly. So before this team received a single complaint, they were proactively able to send an email to every single customer that was impacted and said, we're sorry that you had such a bad experience, here's a refund. So this person dove deep into the data and were able to proactively delight the customer. Which brings me to my last principle, customer obsession. Leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. So when Jeff Bezos started the company, he wanted to make sure he made the most customer-obsessed company. And we have a mechanism in place for this as well. It's called the working backwards mechanism. And in this process, it's an exercise that we do, and we imagine what the product and service would look like 6 months from now when it's launched. What we do is we create a PR, press release, and pretend that it's going to be published in the Wall Street Journal. We talk about the product, the pain point that it's solving, how much when it will be available. And then we bring the team together, our internal stakeholders, and we read this document. We spend about 20 minutes reading the document. If there's no reaction, we don't do anything. If there are reactions, lots of questions, then we go to the FAQ. We try to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers and think about what questions might they ask. What color is it in? Is it in kid size? Will it be available in Japan? So we create the FAQ and answer all of these questions. And we do this before we even write a single line of code. This is an example of the Kindle. Some of you may have our e-reader. Is a 2007 press release that was written to talk about this product that hadn't launched yet. Amazon Kindle, a revolutionary portable reader, wirelessly downloads books, blogs, magazines, and newspapers, available for $399. That was expensive back then. So that's the exercise that we did for the product that some of you are using right now. Once we get buy-in, and it could be maybe we need budget to do this project, or we need resources in terms of headcount or whatnot, we start building our MVPs, or our primitives. So in the case of AWS, the EC2 API that we have was the primitive for the EC2 compute service. The S3 API that we created was the S3 was the primitive for the S3 storage service that we have now. And after we do this, we iterate, and we iterate often. And that's quite important to us, and it's very crucial for us. And the rate of experimentation of how we iterate is also important. And Jeff has something else to say about that.
But successful invention, if you want to do a lot of that, you basically have to increase your rate of experimentation. And that you can think of as a process. How do you go about organizing your systems, your people, all of your assets, your own daily life and how you spend time, how do you organize those things to increase your rate of experimentation?
So architecture is set up this way as well. We started off as a monolithic architecture. Many of you may have just started your company off on a web app. It's easy to get started, but once you start scaling, you can't innovate on the features fast enough. You have to depend on too many teams, have to do a lot of regression testing. So this map over here is all the microservices that you will see when you run Amazon.com today. It's very API driven. And every one of these microservices, you can imagine, is quote unquote a two-pizza team that we have. And they're able to own the functions and the features and are able to develop them to the fullest because they can focus on each one of these things. At the rate of experimentation, it's about how many trials you run and you test in production. So at Amazon, our deployment is quite fast. These are numbers that we can share from May 2011. So in that single month, we were able to deploy push to code, push to production 11.6 seconds, which is really fast. A lot of companies, they may release things every 3 to 6 months. We're able to do it every 11.6 seconds. And this is to production, so it's to 10,000 to even 30,000 instances at once. So this shows how bringing together our culture lets us do this at this pace of rate of experimentation. So we talked about the mechanisms that we put in backwards, the press release and the FAQ. We also talked about the architecture going from monolithic to microservices. We talked about the culture, how we hire, our leadership principles, and how we're set up for experimentation with the two pizza teams. So what is it that you should think about when you're starting off your company, or even if you're building out a team within a bigger company? So we talked about Airbnb and their teams of 10 and less, and we talked about the bottom-up approach that Supercell has, and the teams that the team that Mapillary is running all over the globe. What behaviors that you want to exude? What values do you want to drive? These are things that you should think about. What kind of people you want to hire? And as you grow and you scale, what kind of structures that you want to put in place? And how do you want to enable innovation in your company? Thank you.